Welcome to 132 Problems Revisiting Mormon Polygamy. I am really excited to bring you this conversation with Mads Larsen. This topic is a little bit off of my beaten path. Mads is doing work on this demographic challenge we have that we are facing, being below replacement rates in the West in our reproduction. And there are so many fascinating aspects to this. One of them is the persecution he has faced by trying to just even talk about this topic is really fascinating. Also, part of the reason I reached out to him is because of the work he's done on human mating strategies over time. And that was really fascinating and felt really relevant. We didn't get into a lot of these topics very in depth in our conversation. So his book is linked in the description box. And I highly recommend following his work, reading his book. I really was interested in this heroic period of our of human, I guess, looking at the development of human mating strategies over time. There is so much to learn that is fascinating. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I had my mind blown several times. As I'm bringing it to you, I would also like to encourage people to please consider donating to this podcast. Please subscribe and share these episodes if you find them valuable to you. This is a different topic, but one that I think is extremely important. So thank you, Mads, for joining me, and thank you, all of you. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I am so thrilled to be here with Mads Larsen, who is doing work that I find absolutely fascinating. And I'm so appreciative, Mads, that you were willing to come and talk to me. Mads is meeting us from Oslo, so I think it's 5 o'clock in the morning my time and 1 o'clock in the afternoon your time, if that's right. We wanted to find a window when there was some sunlight, because your sun's about to go down in a couple of hours, right? With our
I don't know. Sunlight is a bold claim, but we do have some daylight for
so daylight. There we go.
Yeah.
We'll take it. Well, the reason I wanted to talk to Mads, I think he is doing absolutely fascinating research, and I think his voice is extremely important in this time that we're fitting in. I know that we are coming from somewhat different worlds. Mads told me, though, I'm sure we'll talk about this, that you spent time in America. You went to UCLA, and you actually have Mormon friends, and so this will be a really fun conversation. We've spoken just a little bit online, and so Mads is working on, I guess, demographic changes throughout time, mating strategies. Are you an evolutionary biologist? Why don't you go ahead and give us an overview of your introduction, and then I would love to let people know about your work before we dive into our conversation.
Yeah, so I'm actually a literary scholar. I use evolutionary theory to analyze literature throughout the ages, to study deep cultural changes. And one of my specialties, and the specialty that I just published a book on, is on mating. How do people mate? How do they have sex? How do they couple up? How do they start families? And how do they reproduce? And that is the most fundamental aspect of any human community, or any community of any organisms. And if we do that wrong, if we fail to get reproduction right and we don't reproduce, we disappear. It's the iron law of evolution. So and also how we mate have exceptionally strong influence on our societies. To the reason you and I can sit in different parts of the world and speak to each other and talk is because of the first sexual revolution around the year 1200, when we've transitioned from living in polygynous kinship societies to living in feudal societies, in nuclear families underpinned by lifelong monogamy. And that set us on a new path that created new psychologies that laid the foundation for modernity.
Oh my gosh, there was so much in what you just said. That's amazing. So first, let's tell people about your book, and then we'll dive into some of this. And so so Mads, you've written one book on this topic, you said, that has open access. Will you tell us a little bit about that, about your process of writing it, and what people can look forward to reading about?
So the problem, as I see it, or the shortcoming of demographers and others working on gender or sex or mating or this demographic collapse that we're facing, is that they're very focused on the present. They grew up in a time that is stunningly unique in human history. The mating regime we have now, it's a complete novelty, and we've only had it for about 50 years. So to understand how we got to where we are today, I had to look at the evolution of human mating, and then I draw a 6 million year canvas back to our last common ancestor with chimpanzees, when we mated promiscuously, and I take us quickly through that and up to about 800 years ago. And then I analyzed the progression of the past 800 years from antiquity's mating ideology of heroic love through medieval courtly and companionate love to modern libertine, romantic, and confluent love. To better understand how we arrived at where we are today, why dating has become dysfunctional and we've stopped reproducing at the necessary level in terms of keeping our population numbers, and also look at considering human mating nature, male and female mate preferences, and our historical past. What are the plausible options for the future, and what I of course don't know how we might solve this, but I, due to my background, I can say something of what tactics and policies are less likely to work, and what might have an effect that is strong enough.
Okay, so this is everything you say has so much in it. I know we could talk for a couple of hours about every sentence that you say, because all of that development of different mating strategies, I guess, throughout time, we could totally dive into that. But what you are leading to is sort of our current looming potential crisis of demographic collapse, right? That we are not reproducing at replacement rates currently. And so I'm curious to know, do you see, I want to dive into that first just a little bit. Tell me, like, what areas, what countries, or what demographics you're most concerned about. I assume that Norway, that's probably where you're from. Like how should we be thinking about this? How big of a problem is this for us to be thinking about?
This is a nearly universal problem for the rich world. The only parts of the world that are reproducing their numbers are primarily Africa, the Middle East, and a few countries further east. Across the other parts of the world, we're below 2.1, which is replacement level. Norway, for instance, the fertility rate is 1.4. That means that every generation will be reduced in size by 1/3. So in only 3 generations, the cohort size will have went from 100 to 30. So in 3 generations, we will have lost 70% of the children. And this creates a very old and aging population, fewer workers, and in a technologically static world, which we don't have, but if we were to live in the same world as we're living now, this would mean, unless we're able to do something about fertility rates, that we will simply self-eradicate. Our societies will no longer be a part of the world, and the world will be taken over by those parts of the world where they still reproduce. That's just, it feels so abstract that fertility and reproduction shouldn't be so central, and the changes are so slow that it's hard for us to relate to them. But as we have an over 1.4, it means self-eradication within not too many generations.
So when you're measuring a generation, is that 20 years? How are you thinking about a generation? I guess since there's older reproductive age, is that 30 years, 40 years? Like tell us how you're thinking about generations.
Yeah, in Norway, women have on average their first child in their early 30s. So generational length has increased.
Okay. So, and I guess the reason it's hard to process this for a lot of people is, human life, 70 years, 80 years, that's only about 2 generations that we are really aware of. So it's hard for us I think it's hard for us as humans to think beyond our lifespan, right? Is that part of why this is hard for people to wrap their minds around and to actually think about in productive ways?
That's one element. I don't think it's the main hindrance to taking this challenge seriously. You also have unfortunate ideological aspects. When I wrote an article about this topic last year, it exploded on Twitter. But it was very interesting where in the world people cared about this. So within 2 weeks, my article had become among the 0.3% of all research outputs who generated the most public engagement. And that was almost exclusively in the Spanish-speaking part of Twitter. So it seems like people from a Catholic cultural background had different intuitions for the importance of reproduction. And just on a related strain, now I am on your podcast. You're a Mormon. 2 days ago, I was on a Catholic podcast. So I mean, it's some people have a culture that that makes them attuned to the importance of this, while in Scandinavia, which is a very secular, feminist, Protestant culture, and I support that fully. I'm programmed by that culture myself. I share it. Saying that women need to have children in order for our community to exist in the future sounds misogynistic. And I was able to spur this debate this summer, and it raged on quite intensely for several months. And the personal attacks and the vitriol on towards me was fairly predictable, because I understand the culture. But people in our cultures don't want to talk about this. It feels like I've been accused of, I'm a feminist leftist like all Scandinavians. But because I bring up this topic, I'm being accused of being right-wing, being a racist, being a misogynist. And it's a difficult, painful subject for people to relate to across the world, but especially in cultures like mine, because we have the background we have. And it shouldn't be that way. I mean, Norway is perhaps arguably the most feminist country on the world. And I consider the fertility crisis it should be the primary battleground for all feminists. The countries in the world that are not reproducing are generally countries where women are free. For the first time in human history, we've created societies where women can make their own partner choices and have equality with men. That is half of the job. We've completed this in a historical, almost you could say miraculous way. The societies we created, especially in Scandinavia, are very favorable towards women. But if we make that large of a cultural change and we're not able to maintain reproduction, our societies will disappear. Then your freedom will, in hindsight, appear to have been an experimental dead end. I mean, if we like the societies we have now, if we want women to be free and to make their own choices, we also have to reproduce. That's unfortunately the reality of it.
Yeah. Okay. So I have two different directions I really want to go. So maybe we'll start. I want to talk sort of about our like humans' history of pair bonding, how we came to be pair bonded, how we, that part of it. But let's first, since we're on this topic, let's talk about the current situation right now, because as I've been thinking about this since encountering, I mean, of course, we've been hearing about the demographic winter for years. And I think it is interesting how people who value reproduction, like Mormons, Catholics, we do seem to be more interested in this topic than the average, than just more liberal Western society, which I think is interesting. And I also, I'm so sorry that you have experienced that, all of that vitriol. I relate to it a bit, but what is so surprising to me is that if we are a mature society, we shouldn't like, throw a fit about just hearing the truth. That's really surprising to me. It's not that people are pushing back and saying, oh, I think you're wrong, Mads, because of this and this and this. They're saying, you can't say that. Don't say that. I don't want to hear that, is how it sounds to me. So we are unwilling to look at just scientific truths that we could potentially do something about, or at least consider what they mean. Instead, we just say, that must not be said. I want to put my head in the ground and hide from it. Is that the experience you're having?
Yeah, and the strange part, these are the leading researchers on demography in Norway saying it, and the people working in the finance department as the experts on this topic. They insist, they've just agreed with themselves that we're not allowed to portray this low fertility as negative, which creates for a strange cognitive dissonance. But yeah, in terms of what you're saying, oh, that's not at all where I place the bar. Those are not my expectations to my fellow humans. That's an enlightenment utopia, and unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know what it would be like. We don't live in that world.
Right.
That is generally how debates unfold. And if we're going to take this debate, which is the most, I would say, arguably the most important debate of our era, we're staring towards self-eradication, and it's kind of legitimate to say that the West has had a good run, but we've lost our appetite for continued existence. So let's just enjoy the generations that are left and then leave the world to someone else. But if that is what we're going to do, if we are going to commit this collective suicide as communities, we should at least have a conversation about it first and see if this is really what we want to do, or if we want to start talking about the problem, taking it with the seriousness that it deserves, start experimenting with solutions, and see if we over time can create cultural change, a new ideology of love again. I mean, the one we have, it's only been hegemonic for about half a century, which it's a very short time. But I'm predicting that with the technologies that are coming from the fourth industrial revolution, with AI, automation, gene hacking, artificial wombs, we're gonna go to what I would call the West's fourth sexual revolution, which will be a new mating regime. And we need to start talking about this, how we can create this new reality that we're moving towards so that we can adapt culturally to our new environment.
Okay, so I do have a couple of questions. For me as a woman, so I don't know if you know, I have a large family. I have many children, and it's foreign to me, honestly, to relate to people not wanting children, not valuing children. So I wanted to understand that a little bit better, and I'm curious. It sounds to me like, from what you're saying now and what I've heard you say on other podcasts, that you are thinking the only way out is forward to this new future that, frankly, to me sounds terrible. Like either going to a place where we don't have Western values of freedom and equality, and we instead go to a more not a more backward society where those things aren't valued, but they have more children, right? Or going into this AI potential nightmare. I mean, who knows what that will do for human flourishing and for well-being, individual well-being. So I'm curious to know, well, a couple of things, because you do say women have to have children, and that's misogynistic. And I guess I'm curious about that attitude. I'd like to understand that a little more and dig into it, because to me, it's couples need to have children. I think that we are a pair bonding species, and that that's the ideal, you know, and that really children should be an equal investment between men and women. And as I've been thinking about how my society, my community is set up to value and facilitate children, I just wanted to know, like, is there any chance that you see of sort of a resurgence of something a little bit more traditional rather than just going to the AI revolution? I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Like, is there a possibility? Because from my perspective, my life is very happy. You know, I really like this ideology. It has served us very well. We have so much joy in our family. I've loved being a mother, even though it is a lot of work. My husband has loved being a father. We have a more traditional lifestyle. I'm just curious if do people just see this as so backward in a way that they can't even conceptualize that there could be something of value in this perspective?
Yeah, no, the stereotype of Mormons is annoyingly happy and successful. People look at Mormons and find it suspicious. And of course, this doesn't apply to all Mormons, just the ones I know and the ones you see in the media. That, yeah, they do everything wonderfully and have these big families and everything works and everybody's happy and everyone's great. So yeah, people don't look at that and think, yeah, we should be Mormons. Why do they smile all the time? But aside from that, yeah. So the thing is, we're now facing an existential threat, and we have many different communities with different cultural legacies, and different communities will, due to this legacy and happenstance, be drawn to different experiments and solutions. I consider there to be a negligible chance in Norway for us returning to more traditional male-female relationships. In our previous regime of romantic love from the early 1800s to the 1960s, the ideology imposed that men and women were incomplete halves who, through finding their other half, could enter into a pair bond of lifelong monogamy underpinned by strong feelings of emotion, and then self-realized through the breadwinner housewife model. We have no love for that in Norway and Scandinavia today. We are appalled by people who suggest that it could be a good idea for women to stay home with children. That is not among the window that does not exist within the window of opportunity that we have in Scandinavia. But you see other places in the world. Some countries are restricting reproductive rights for women, perhaps partially inspired by low fertility. And I think in some countries, certainly you will see a return to more traditional family forms as an attempt to get fertility rates back up. Pretty certain Scandinavia will not experiment in that direction. Our highest value is female freedom, and we define female freedom as pursuing a career while also having children. And if the children get in the way, you prioritize the career. That's the Scandinavian way. And that's how I feel too. I was programmed by this. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm not saying that this is a model for emulation. This is just what I grew up with. And these are the cultural and political emotions that were programmed into me. So I would not advocate for Norway returning to the more traditional family forms. I would rather that Norway would commit to the path we're on now and see if is there a way. Our contribution could be to see if there's a way we can solve this problem without restricting what we consider women's freedoms. And then other countries will experiment with other things, and we will see what works. And then we can perhaps in the future learn from each other, or just have some communities disappear while others don't.
Okay. So yeah, I want to stay on this topic for a minute, because I do feel like in some ways it's hard to even share a mindset, because when I'm asking my question, I'm not talking in any way about limiting women's freedoms or making anything like that. I guess my
No, I fully understand your mindset and perspective, but your mindset and perspective isn't understood by the Scandinavian mindset and perspective. I mean, I've lived in the U.S. I've traveled extensively across the world. I've known people with so many different mindsets that I find it fairly straightforward, a lot of the time at least, to put myself in their shoes in terms of thinking and how they view the world. But then I also understand why Scandinavians would consider what you consider not to take freedom from women, Scandinavians would consider misogynistic and a way of taking freedom away from women, because freedom is a word that anybody defines any which way they prefer.
Right. So that's what I'm wanting to just stick on for a little bit longer, is this idea that motherhood is antithetical to women's happiness and to women's freedom. That is so foreign to me. And, because as a woman who does really love motherhood, I'm curious why there is this mindset that views motherhood as somehow like not good for women. And, is it just a matter of the pregnancy, or that like what is that and why when we are so focused on self-actualization and happiness, and we do understand that struggle is required for happiness. Like I rarely hear people say, oh, it's so unfair that women have to work and have to have a career and have to sacrifice to have a successful career, and they have to get up every day and they have to get an education. And that's viewed as liberation, while the idea that you would have a child is viewed as backward bondage. It's like that is very foreign to me. I consider myself very privileged to have had the opportunity to raise my children. And, so why is it viewed as sort of bondage and slavery rather than a privilege?
Yeah. So there's two things I want to touch on there. Firstly, it's not considered the way you describe it. Motherhood is considered very positive in Scandinavia as well. Women should absolutely have children. It's a great source of joy. It helps your self-realization if you want to. So it's up to the woman. If she wants to have children, it's great. And then if a woman doesn't want to, that's perfectly fine. So it's not that mother is bad. It's just a question of individual preference. And in Scandinavia, we really strongly promote children and families. We want that too. The reason why career and self-realization professionally is so important, and perhaps more important than motherhood, is can be traced back to Martin Luther. So the Nordic countries are the world's only Lutheran countries, while your country, America, is in the Calvinist tradition, another Protestant strain. And one of the main distinctions there that have strongly shaped the difference between our societies in the Nordic countries and, say, the US, is the view of work. Work in itself ennobles and is a very important way to self-realize and to contribute to your community. So even rich people should work just to contribute to others. And then Martin Luther was quite a misogynist, but his way of thinking around work, when feminism came around in the Lutheran countries, translated into women also having to work. And the consequence of that is that the Scandinavian countries have the strongest female labor force participation, much higher than, for instance, in the US. And this contributes to why we are among the richest societies in the world, because women also contribute. They don't work as much as men, but compared to other countries, it's a lot more equal in that participation. So it's just the premise and important of contributing through your labor your entire life has a much higher position due to our Lutheran past compared to your Calvinist background.
Oh, okay. This is really interesting. So I'm sorry. I don't want to, I hope it's not annoying to you if I keep asking questions about this, because I do have a couple of questions. First of all, if women are not tending to have children, I'm curious about why they have lower labor force participation, even in Norway. And then my other question is, if, as you describe it, that it is viewed as a cultural, the way to contribute to culture that's encouraged and important is in the labor force. Why is it not also that what is needed in culture is contributing in the labor force in terms of care, child care? And I don't think it needs to be either male or female. Just valuing child, like a parent providing childcare. Why is that not given any value when it would contribute so much to a society?
It is given exceptional value in some extents. We have among the world's highest maternity and paternity leaves, extremely generous public benefits for parents, for childcare, subsidized daycare, free education, free healthcare. So our social democracies have created what I would say, without a doubt, is the best material foundation for having children. You could say in human history, but that's comparing apples and oranges. So let's at least say in the modern world. So we do value it tremendously, and we've built an economic foundation for reproduction that, from a logical perspective, if we were reasonable beings, you would think that this would be the golden age of reproduction. We are so rich, we've made it so materially easy to have children compared to all other ages, that we should now be popping out children like popcorn. But instead, we're having fewer and fewer of them. And an important aspect there is you're focusing on how people don't want to have children. That is an element, but that element is probably quite small. The ideological, so earlier times there was a strong ideological imposition on us to reproduce, to start a family, be married and reproduce. That is drastically weakened, but people still want to reproduce. And the numbers there are that Norwegian women want 2.4 children, but they're only having 1.4. So things are getting in the way of their pair bonding, and therefore also down the line their reproduction. And there's an element once they pair bond and decide to have children that maybe some are ideologically dissuaded from having children, but that seems to be of not so large an importance.
Okay, so there's actually a crisis within a crisis where women are not having the life that they want. I think it's quite a painful thing for women to want children and not be able to have them. And I can't remember maybe you will remember the man who does the work, that he has done the work on the lower fertility rate. And I think the assumption is that women who would have had 2.4 children are now having 1.4 instead. But what has been what it's looking like is like, no, the women who are having children are still having the same number of children, but many more women who do want children are not able to have children, do not have that opportunity, which is really sort of a lifelong tragedy, because having children, I don't think many of us have children thinking about our future and our old age and our, like what's going to happen to us as grandparents without grandchildren. But that is something to think about that continues to play out in this tragedy for, say, a woman who wants children and isn't able to have them. And then as an older person is just alone and who knows how they're being taken care of, right? So it really does seem like, so what I'm hearing you say is that there are women who want children who aren't able to have them. And I want to kind of drill down on why that might be. But at the same time, if you talk about this is seen as misogynistic and anti-feminist. So I'm curious.
Well, there's an important aspect there, though, that in Norway there are 3 times as many men who are involuntarily childless as there are women. So women, to some extent, recycle the most attractive mates in a form of temporal polygamy. where they have where a man will have children with a woman, then move on to the next woman, have children with her, and so forth. So there's 3 times as many men as women in Norway who do not have children against their will. So that's also an important factor. But what drives this? One of the main drivers of low fertility in the modern world is people's problems with finding a pair bond. And one perspective on it that I believe is quite valuable to explore, because within that is probably where we first should start looking for solutions. And that is that women find an increasing number of men not to be good enough. So, and this is very predictable considering our evolutionary history, that with the environment we're created now, we would expect women to raise their demands for a potential partner in a way that makes it hard to form pair bonds, because with a shrinking number of men who are considered good enough for women, there will of course be fewer and fewer couples. So what we see with modern dating, and especially enhanced by apps like Tinder, is that an increasing number of the mating opportunities, that is through dating and sex, are channeled toward a very small proportion of the most attractive men, while the men with lower mate values get fewer and fewer mating opportunities, fewer dates, fewer opportunities to have sex. With modern mating, what we call the short-term market, the dating and sleeping around, that is the entry point to the long-term market. So if women are depriving themselves of the opportunity to expose themselves to men with similar mate value, and instead go on dates with men that are much more attractive than they are, then pair bonding is an unlikely result, because in monogamous regimes, humans mate assortatively. We tend to pair up with someone of similar mate value as we are. And with that dysfunction on dating markets, women spend a very long time trying to find a partner. They might not find one, or they find one so late in life that the reproductive window is shortened.
Okay, so the demographic problem is downstream from the dating and the pairing and the mating problem.
That is one of the elements, and it's one of experts agree that this is one of the main drivers. And I would say that this is a particularly interesting element because it's one that we can understand. We understand why it's this way. And there are perhaps interventions we can agree on to experiment with to see if there's another way of dating that can expose women to men that they can actually end up being pair bonded with. Of course, many other things play in, but this is a main one, and it's something we perhaps can do something about. Other things like urbanization, a fear of the future, a different mating ideology, as I mentioned, those are also impactful, but there's no government that can say we've just decided that we now have a new mating ideology. But we can do something about our dating format and try to facilitate. The good thing here is that it is a win-win situation. Men and women want to be pair bonded. They tend to be happier when they are pair bonded. And we simply didn't evolve to spend years and years and years of our life looking for Mr. and Mrs. Right. All human societies until in modern times, we've had arranged marriages with different extent of parental influence. So we're in a brand new regime of individual choice, and we've only had it universalized for about half a century. And these processes usually can take several centuries to complete. So we just haven't found a way to reconcile this new mating regime of confluent love with reproduction. And the main issue there is, how can we make men and women fall in love and pair bond so that they are in a position to have children? And then the question is whether they will do it or not. But considering how women would like 2.4, it seems that helping people pair up, that is where we initially should place our focus, in my opinion.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yes. Okay, that's thanks for helping me understand that, because I have been so curious about this. So there is a value for children. There's a desire for children. There's honor given to parenthood. The challenge is trying to find the pair bond to enable that value to play out. So it sounds to me, tell me if I'm correct, but I mean, from my perspective, we kind of broke monogamy. Like monogamy serves us well as humans, I believe, as we're seeing. And so we have descended, and this is my perception of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've descended into a sort of dysfunctional version of polygyny. And that is not serving us well as a species, because all polygamous societies have similar problems where we have, what we could term in Mormon fundamentalism, the lost boys, all of the males without an opportunity for mating, right? And then also we lose so many values like paternal involvement in offspring, and we have a lot of problems that come from polygyny in the best of when it's even officially recognized, let alone sort of this accidental polygyny that we find ourselves in. Is that what you're seeing? That's kind of what we're seeing, right?
Yeah. So we need to go a little bit back in time. So for the past 4 million years, polygyny has been generally widespread. About 2 million years ago, the norm had become monogamous for a species, but there were still polygamists. It's just that when we were foragers, a man couldn't provide for that many women. But with agriculture, when that was implemented, powerful men could hoard all the resources, including the women, and then you saw a strong uptick in polygyny, and some men hoarded tens, hundreds, and some thousands of women. So polygyny has always been with us, and it's a good thing from the perspective that one of our strengths as a species is a flexibility. So if you go to war and half the men get killed off, then you can practice polygyny with the men that are left. It's a strength to have that. But exactly as you say, polygyny in antiquity had a lot of adverse consequences. It commoditized women. It gave less attention to each child. Sexual competition for powerful men was extended throughout their life as they were seeking new partners. And as you mentioned, you have all these low-value men who are left without mating prospects.
I want to jump into this conversation here and take a few minutes to highlight some of the information that Mads has written about and that first made me want to interview him. We discussed these things somewhat, so you'll hear a short repeat of some of this information. But I want to draw more specific attention to the areas of his research that are most applicable to the topic of polygamy, so that it doesn't get lost in all of the other very important information he has to share. And so I can point out some of the connections I see to Mormon polygamy. As Mads stated here, and as he writes in his book, which is linked below, monogamy became the norm for our ancestors around 2 million years ago. I'll add that means, according to evolutionary science, our pre-human predecessors became monogamous at the same time that they started using tools. Claiming that polygamy is what is natural or best for our species is simply not true. According to the best evolutionary science, we were monogamous 1.7 to 1.8 million years before we were Homo sapiens, and about 1.9 million years before we developed the capacity for language. There weren't necessarily societal or religious pressures to enforce monogamy. It was simply biologically advantageous. But with the development of agriculture and the inequality that ensued in the larger civilizations it enabled, patriarchal polygyny emerged in a big and rather horrifying way. I'll let Mads explain this from his interview with Chris Williamson, which will also be linked below.
What we see, what is quite interesting, is that for those 2 million years, the norm was monogamous pair bonding with some polygyny, but a really superior forager just couldn't provide for that many females. But we see that with agriculture, that took off and resulted in pretty extreme polygyny in the most inequitous environments. Around 7,000 years ago, all the best agricultural land had been taken. So then if you wanted to grow, what you had to do was to take land from others. And that created a 2,000-year period from 7 to 5,000 years ago that had a pretty bizarre mating regime.
So for a 2,000-year period between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago, polygyny became a far more common mating strategy for human societies. I'll let Mads go on to describe what that looked like.
And what probably happened was that for those 2,000 years, all everyone did in order to be able to grow their tribes, because the only way to grow was to take the fields of your neighbor. So then you had a universal system of intertribal raiding where when your kin group was strong enough, you would go to your neighbors, kill all the males and take all the females and all the fields, and that was yours. And people kept doing this for 2,000 years until 95% of the original male DNA was just wiped off the genetic slate. So it's, 2,000 years of universal genocide and rape.
So I hope you notice his description of what happened in polygamy when our ancestors returned to a polygamous mating strategy. Mads's research is based in the Nordic countries, not the Middle East, but I couldn't help but be reminded of what appear to be similar patterns from the Old Testament. For one example, the destruction of the Midianites, described in part in Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 through 18 say, "Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves." Most of us find these parts of the Bible deeply, deeply troubling, as we should. So as I've mentioned before, it is important to remember that Orson Pratt, the main theological apologist for early Mormon polygamy, discussed this genocide in positive terms, this genocide and rape in positive terms, as evidence of God's support for polygamy. And more recently, Ogden Kraut, the most prolific Mormon polygamy apologist in recent memory, resurrected Pratt's argument. So let me show right here. This is Ogden Kraut's book, Polygamy and the Bible. And we'll go ahead and start at section 5, which is called Additional Wives as the Spoils of War. This is, he quotes those same verses from Numbers 31, and he says, "With this law, the Lord made further provisions for polygamy among his people. This was a law allowing women who were taken as the spoils of war to be the wives to the Israelites. One instance of this was a war against the Midianites. Moses told the men that, quote, of every tribe 1,000 throughout all the tribes of Israel shall ye send to war. This meant that 12,000 able-bodied men went to war against the Midianites with instructions from the Lord that they would save only, quote, the women children that have not known a man by lying with him. After the destruction of this battle, there were 32,000 women taken as new wives. These Israelites took back home an average of nearly 3 wives each." Notice the exclamation point. "This was the law of the Lord, and this was only one battle!" Exclamation point. "It happened on many other occasions. There is little doubt that the Lord approved of polygamy when he gave this law to a people that already had a surplus of women. This was a law generally practiced by the Lord's people so they could increase their numbers and dominions. This law was to be observed in their battles with all other nations, not just the Midianites. For example, the Lord repeated it by saying, 'Whence thou comest nigh unto a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace unto it. And if it will make no peace with thee, but will make war against thee, then thou shalt besiege it. And when the Lord thy God hath delivered it into thy hands, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword. But the women and the little ones and the cattle and all that is in the city, even all the spoils of war, shalt thou take unto thyself.'" So interesting how we have the Old Testament in some sections seemingly advocating the same morality that Mads is discussing in his work. I'm going to skip forward a little bit to continue. Ogden Kraut goes on to discuss the principle that the Israelites were increasing their numbers upon the principle of plural marriages obtained through the ravages of war and obedience to the law as commanded by the Lord. Why did the Lord command soldiers to preserve the females and not the males? Because the Lord wanted his people to have a plurality of wives so they could raise up a numerous posterity quickly by men who would teach them the laws of God. These women brought into Israel and into the families of polygamists were subject to the rules of Israel. They soon learned that such a man was worthy of respect and honor. It did not take them very long to appreciate good men, even though they had been brought into polygamy by such catastrophic conditions. It is fascinating to me to see this polygamist apologist basing his arguments on the exact same morality that Mads is describing and that we all are decrying in the work that he has done. Isn't this fascinating? Kraut goes on to talk about how important it must be to Heavenly Father to send his children, some will know I don't like those terms that make God only male, but to send his children, quote, to the homes of righteous men who would properly care for them and teach them good conduct and respect for God. He says God would, quote, rather trust a dozen children to a good man, meaning one of these men who succeeded in genocide and rape, or he would rather send a dozen children to a good man rather than give one child to a wicked man, meaning the men who were killed. This fits very well into the morality of what Mads describes as heroic love, that where women just had to mate with the hero, meaning the one who succeeded, the last man standing, right? As 19 out of 20 men were killed during this culture. Kraut identified the men who committed the genocide and rape as the righteous men, the only men worthy of being fathers. And we'll go ahead and read his last paragraph, how he sums this all up. Right here, he said, "No wonder the Lord gave this law for taking women out of the camps of the wicked and giving them to the more honorable men. No wonder God provided this regulation as a part of his law for plural marriage." I find this amazing. These comparisons are really important to recognize. For anybody inclined to believe that God ever commands polygamy, it is essential to see how unbelievably backward the morality of it is. These are the attitudes required to defend and advocate the idea that God commands polygamy, that God even sometimes commands polygamy. At least they are the arguments that have consistently been made by the main polygamist theologians, including the Apostle Orson Pratt, who Brigham Young charged with making the arguments to defend polygamy. This is why we must discuss and, in my opinion, thoroughly reject these ideas. As Mads continues, you can see even more how similar the Mormon polygamist arguments and morality seem to be to this truly horrific time in human civilization that Mads is describing.
During this regime, a woman had to always be ready to submit to the greater warrior. You didn't necessarily have feudal rulers or other state structures that could protect people. People always up until this time lived in kin groups. And if other groups came and defeated you, then the men would be killed and enslaved, and the women would often be captured. So if women wanted a chance to survive and protect themselves and their children, they now had to submit to whomever had killed their father or their husband. So this was an extremely misogynistic rape culture, and this is what marked up until 1,000 years ago. This was the original patriarchy, where the male lineages was matter, and women they had different way of conceptualizing this, but women were more like soil where the patriarchal seed were put. So this way, as long as you had these beliefs, you could just capture as many women as you wanted or were able to, and then keep growing your kin group.
So I need to acknowledge that early Mormon Utah was not always defined by rape. That's not exactly how polygamy worked in early Mormon Utah. Although a woman or girl's consent was not a priority, as many women and girls were assigned or given away in marriages to far older men that they likely would not have chosen, as was the case with my great-great-grandmother, who was given away at 17 by Brigham Young in General Conference to a man in his 40s. And also the misery of women in this society is well documented, including by Brigham Young himself. However, there is a very interesting twist between what Mads describes and what Brigham Young established. Instead of the most powerful warriors wiping out men and stealing their wives, Brigham Young established a system where higher leaders in the church could marry the wives of lower status men in the church. I've before called it Brigham's doctrine of marrying up. And this is what he taught in 1861. Quote, if a woman can find a man holding the keys of the priesthood with higher power and authority than her husband, and he is disposed to take her, he can do so. Otherwise, she has got to remain where she is. There is no need for a bill of divorcement. There are several different records of this talk that Brigham Young gave describing this doctrine of marrying up, right? Where the higher status man could take the wife or the wives of the lower status men. It's fascinating how this same pattern still shows up in Utah polygamy of higher status men taking the wives of lower status men, even without violence. Although we can't ignore the cases where it seems that there was violence. For example, Brigham Young's support of Bishop Warren Snow in Manti, who in 1857 castrated Thomas Lewis. The castration is very well documented, although there is some uncertainty about the cause. It is possible that it was the result of some sexual indiscretion, but several sources claim that the bishop, who was 39 at the time and already married to 4 or 5 wives, depending on whether his 5th wife, a 14-year-old girl he married right about this time, was the girl from the story, or it could possibly be the 17-year-old he married this same month. In any case, he wanted to marry a girl, possibly one of these wives, who was in love with Thomas Lewis, who was in his early to mid-20s, between 23 and 24. And when Lewis refused to give her up or to accept the mission call Bishop Snow issued to try to get him out of the way, the bishop took matters into his own hands and, according to the sources we have, brutally castrated his competition, this younger man. One of the bishop's counselors wrote a letter saying that the young man, quote, has now gone crazy after being castrated by the bishop. When Brigham Young heard what Bishop Snow had done, he responded, quote, I feel to sustain him. He wrote a letter to Bishop Snow advising him, quote, just let the matter drop and say no more about it, and it will soon die away among the people. It is hard to escape the reality that polygamous societies, including early Utah, tend to revert to these forms of hierarchical power and at times violence. Another thing Mads discusses that is extremely applicable to Mormon polygamy is the commodification of women and the priority put on the lineage of men. I've often discussed Section 132 fully commoditizes women, speaking repeatedly of them being taken from or given to men as punishments or rewards and destroyed if they will not comply. I can again share a few examples. 132 verse 39, David's wives and concubines were given unto him of me, but because David has fallen, he shall not inherit them out of the world, for I gave them unto another, saith the Lord. In verse 44, God gives man, quote, power by the power of my holy priesthood to take her and give her unto him that hath not committed adultery, but hath been faithful, for he shall be made ruler over many. Verse 48, whatsoever you give on earth, and to whomsoever you give anyone on earth, by my word and according to my law, it shall be visited with blessings and not cursings. Then some of these other threats of destruction. Now recall, this is addressing Joseph and Emma, although my argument that I think the history shows is that this was not actually Joseph's words. It was not actually referring to Emma Smith. It was compiled later by others, most likely in Utah. So verse 52, and let mine handmaid Emma Smith receive all those that have been given unto my servant Joseph, and who are virtuous and pure before me. And those who are not pure and have said they were pure shall be destroyed, saith the Lord God. And I give unto my servant that he shall be made ruler over many things. If any man this is skipping down to verse 61. I'm just giving several examples to see how this continues to play out, even in what is still our canonized scripture. If any man espouse a virgin and decide to espouse another, and the first give her consent, and if he espouse the second, and they are virgins and have vowed to no other man, then is he justified. He cannot commit adultery, for they are given unto him. For he cannot commit adultery with that belongeth to him and to no one else. And if he have 10 virgins given unto him by this law, he cannot commit adultery, for they belong to him, and they are given unto him. Therefore is he justified. But if one or either of the 10 virgins, after she is espoused, shall be with another man, she has committed adultery and shall be destroyed. For they are given unto him to multiply and replenish the earth according to my commandment. That's what we claim to be the word of the Lord, that I think we strongly need to question and reevaluate, especially seeing the morality that it is based in. It is amazing to me. It really is that this section, which is stuck in this rape culture morality of 7,000 to 5,000 years ago, is canonized in our scriptures. So Matt's statement about the central importance of the lineage of men, with women being viewed as merely the soil to carry the men's noble seed, is also extremely applicable to Mormon polygamy. Brigham Young actually said this: I would almost be ashamed of my body if it would beget a child that would not obey the law of God. I've talked about that before, comparing it to Adam from the Old Testament, who begat Cain. I won't go into this topic of lineage here, but there is much to say on it. I will say, however, that I have been deeply troubled over the past few years to see that one of the most rabid advocates, polygamy advocates, has taken to talking much about the critical importance of lineage and sacred seed as her central way to explain and defend polygamy. Her arguments are quite incoherent, but are also extremely troubling. They make it abundantly clear that she still supports not only polygamy and the arguments that were used to defend it, but also the racial priesthood ban. Again, the morality that she adheres to in her pro-polygamy arguments fits much better in this awful polygamist culture of 7,000 years ago than it does in the civilization that shaped the modern world. The pre-Civil War political leaders who coined the phrase the twin relics of barbarism to refer to polygamy and slavery have been proven correct. And so what a tragedy it is that people in our religion still hold to any of these elements of these atrocious practices. So I'll go back to Mads, where he is discussing yet another huge problem that always comes with polygamy: the lost boys.
I'm sure it was an absolute nightmare for these people that had to go through this. And what drove much of this was that these kin groups generally practiced polygynous mating. So you'd had elite individuals who would hoard women as wives, concubines, and sex slaves. So for the low value men, they didn't have access to pair bonding or copulation. So then they were driven throughout antiquity to, when they had a strong enough position, to go to whomever their neighbors were, and then kill the men, take their stuff, and take their women. So this polygynous mating that marked this period under heroic love drove a lot of war, a lot of social instability. It was a quite enormous change that happened when the church imposed lifelong monogamy, even on the most superior of males. That changed everything.
So this, again, I just have to say of polygamy: by their fruits you shall know them. The fruits of polygamy were always and are always inequality, instability, violence, and war in every case that we have seen. And as he said, the church enforcing monogamy, even on the most powerful males, is what changed everything and finally brought civilization out of that awful time. I shouldn't say it's I probably overstated that when I said it's what always happens, because I know that there are people who are trying to live ethical polygamy today. I just think that we need to be careful with the experiments that we are running because of what we can see throughout our human history. Defenders of polygamy had and have a very different perspective on the development of monogamy, the establishment of monogamy, than what Mads is describing. In almost a perfect reversal of truth, many of them, including Brigham Young, Orson Pratt, Helen Whitney, and many, many others, claimed monogamy was a great evil, a hypocritical and tyrannical system that led to disease and death and would destroy civilization and the world. These are the arguments they needed to make in order to defend and promote polygamy. Helen Mar Kimball wrote, "It is a notorious fact where the system of monogamy prevails. The most common cause of murder is unhappy marriages. Husbands murder their wives and wives murder their husbands or incite others to do it almost every week." Remember, the woman I spoke about who wrote that article uses Helen Mar Kimball as one of her main examples of an advocate for polygamy, right? Who she glorifies on this topic. Brigham Young said in 1852, when polygamy was first acknowledged, the principles spoken upon by Brother Pratt, that means polygamy, we believe in, and I will tell you, for I know it, it will sail over and ride triumphantly above all the prejudice and priestcraft of the day. It will be fostered and believed in by the more intelligent portions of the world as one of the best doctrines ever proclaimed by any people. He went on to claim that others agreed with him that, quote, if the United States do not adopt that very method, let them continue as they now are, meaning in monogamy, pursue that precise course that they are pursuing, and it will come to this, that their generations will not live until they are 30 years old. They are going to destruction. Disease is spreading so fast among the inhabitants of the United States that they are born rotten with it, and within a few years, they are gone. Apparently, according to Brigham Young, due to monogamy. It's so fascinating to me every time I read this, how, again, inverted it is with what actually happened. It was the church that went to destruction as long as it pursued monogamy, just as the Book of Mormon warned and always warns will happen. So this was the same 1852 conference where Orson Pratt claimed that, quote, giving his faithful servants a plurality of wives was the Lord's way to prevent, quote, haunts of prostitution, degradation, and misery. He explained that this was necessary, quote, for we have got a fallen nature to grapple with. That's what Orson Pratt said. I always have to read it. And 17 years later, he was still talking about the evils of monogamy that was developed by old pagan Rome and its Greek worshippers of idols. This is quoting him. Old pagan Rome and Greece, worshippers of idols, passed a law confining man to one wife. You may think that this is a strange statement, but it is a fact that those nations were the founders of what is termed monogamy. All other nations, with few exceptions, had followed the scriptural plan of more wives than one. So again, the scriptures promote more wives than one. Apparently he hadn't read the Book of Mormon very much, because it always promotes one wife and only one wife, and decries, forbids, and what's the word I'm looking for? Condemns any other system. I'll go on quoting Pratt. The one-wife system has been established by law among the nations descended from the great Roman Empire, namely the nations of modern Europe and the American states. So, you know, the nations that gave us human rights, self-government, the preservation of the Bible, the printing press, literacy, infrastructure, science, and so much more. The foundation of weird nations, which weird means Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. The nations we are very thankful to live in. Emerged through and because of monogamy. But that is not Pratt's view. He goes on. This law of monogamy, or the monogamic system, laid the foundation for prostitution and the evils and disease of the most revolting nature and character under which modern Christendom groans. For as God has implanted, I always, again, have to, when they blame monogamy for prostitution, it's so interesting to go to the Old Testament story of the patriarch that went to the prostitute that turned out to be his daughter-in-law Tamar, right? That was not in the monogamic system. To claim that prostitution emerged as a result of monogamy is, again, extreme historical and scriptural illiteracy. And so he continues, God has implanted for a wise purpose certain feelings in the breasts of females as well as males, the gratification of which is necessary to health and happiness, and which can only be accomplished legitimately in the married state. Myriads of those who have been deprived of the privilege of entering that state, rather than be deprived of the gratification of those feelings altogether, have in despair given way to the wickedness and licentiousness. Hence the whoredoms and prostitution among the nations of the earth, where the mother of harlots has her seat. That's what he has to say about monogamy. So according to the polygamous Pratt, monogamy is the cause of every societal ill, while polygamy would lead to utopia. Madd's work truly does reveal that the very opposite is true, and the studies that he cites in his work. So I'm going to play this one last clip of Madd's, and then we'll get back to the conversation.
So this is when they dissolved Europe's tribes through prohibiting cousin marriage, changing rules for inheritance and ownership, and then imposing lifelong monogamy, which was a very unusual, unique rather extreme way of thinking of mating. But when you do this, if you want to understand the origins of the modern world, this was it. Because then you create the sexual egalitarianism. This is how you make parents invest in children. This is where you prepare for growth and where you start creating a different, more individualistic psychology, different way of thinking. You lower men's testosterone. So instead of superior men competing all their life to acquire more women, you get to compete until you get one. And then you have to put your efforts in a more productive direction.
It is hard to overstate how important this change was and how much it affected society for the better. The lowering of men's testosterone and focusing men's efforts and energies and brain chemistry in more productive directions is incredibly important. I covered this topic in depth clear back in episode 26, which is called Polygamy and the Male Brain. I will also link it below. It is a fascinating and extremely important topic to understand. And so now with this deeper understanding of the real impacts and outcomes of polygamy and how it relates to our history of Mormon polygamy and the arguments that are still sometimes being made. And again, you'll hear a little bit of this repeated going forward. With this understanding, we can now go back to the conversation where Mads shares a breathtaking insight that completely blew me away.
But exactly as you say, polygamy in antiquity had a lot of adverse consequences. It commoditized women. It gave less attention to each child. Sexual competition for powerful men was extended throughout their life as they were seeking new partners. And as you mentioned, you have all these low-value men who are left without mating prospects. Probably the main driver of the Viking Age was that there was such a high rate of polygamy in late Iron Age Scandinavia that regular men simply didn't have any mating opportunities. So when technology and the political context made possible mating, they went out into Europe to get women and to get riches to qualify for the domestic mating market. So it's all through antiquity. It's driven so much war. It's driven so much internal stability. Throughout history, we've had this problem with roaming bands of unmarried men causing all kinds of havoc. So polygamy has been very destabilizing. And for whatever reason, the church decided to get so serious on lifelong monogamy with the West's first sexual revolution around 1200. That created the foundation for modernity. Without it, as I said earlier, this would not have happened, at least not as it did, because it created a new psychology, a sexual egalitarianism where most men were married. And I mean, for our species, probably of those who reached adulthood, 80% of women reproduced, but only 40% of men. So the church imposed from the first to the third sexual revolution a uniquely egalitarian mating regime in the West. And this peaked in the 1950s in the West with near universal marriage. Almost everyone married, and they did so late, and they started having children early. This is what we moved away from. We now have the first societies in the world with free women, where women can make their own partner choices. And we now have a similar stratification as we had in antiquity, before the first sexual revolution. But then, in the ancient world, women were distributed based on how men did in patriarchal status games, power games. So if you could accumulate a lot of resources, you could then have the women you could afford and desired. And then we have this uniquely egalitarian mating regime, which created modernity, which was the foundation for that. And now we have a similar stratification of men, what researchers call a de facto polygamous regime. But this time, it's not based on the patriarchal status games of men. It's based on female mate preferences. And we can get into, if you want to, the difference between women's promiscuous attraction system and the pair bonding attraction system. And that explains a lot of why you have, during this mating regime since the 1960s, seen a stronger and stronger stratification among men, where a small proportion of the most attractive men get an increasing number of sex partners and mating opportunities and pair bonds, while a growing proportion of the men at the bottom are shut out of this part of the world. They're just discriminated against and excluded. And the thing is that has been the reality for men throughout our history most of the time, that men cannot rely on being able to entering into a fatherhood phase. Like I said, fewer than half of men who lived got to reproduce. But now the power is with the women. So if we're going to do, before, the power was with the patriarchy. Men ruled the world. now women rule this part of the world, the mating regime. It's they who have the power of the short-term mating market, which is the entry point to the long-term mating market. So if we're going to solve this, women have to take the lead. They have the power. This is the regime we have now are based on their preferences. And if women want there to be free women also in the future, we have to find a way to reconcile today's regime with reproduction. Otherwise, as I've said, we will disappear.
Okay. There was so much there. So a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, you blew my mind with, I hadn't even considered that, we've always heard about the Vikings attacking the European, that like what I just heard you say is that kind of grew out of polygyny. Polygamy is what caused the Viking raids, or is a part of what led to them. These were the disenfranchised, unpaired men who were attacking. Is that part of what you're saying with that?
Yeah, that was the main driver, in the sense that this is what drove people to do this. They couldn't get access to women. And also on the top, this was an alliance between high and low status men. The high status men wanted to go out and raid to get more women. And then the low status men wanted to get to women. So this is throughout, especially through antiquity, so many wars were driven by a community becoming strong enough to be able to attack a neighbor and take their women. The grossest, bizarrest expression of this, I mean, that shows you how deep this is in our nature, was what happened from 7,000 to 5,000 years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with that. 95%
I've heard you talk about it before. Yeah, tell us. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So this was a big puzzle that was discovered. Nobody expected this. It was discovered in 2015 through the study of ancient DNA. We saw that from 7,000 to 5,000 years ago, Y chromosome diversity declined by 95%, while female DNA diversity increased with population growth. 19 out of 20 men disappeared. So first they thought that was due to rampant polygamy, but that was a terrible hypothesis. That's just, it's not in line with human nature for a variety of reasons. You couldn't have that strict of a regime everywhere and have it be stable. What probably happened was that when all the good agricultural land was taken 7,000 years ago, universally across the old world, meaning not America, which was where this study was taken, kin groups, when they outgrew their territory, their only means for continued growth was to raid their neighbors, kill all the men, and take their women in fields. And we did this for 2,000 years until only 5% of the original. It's a bit hard to express, but of 5% of the, so you could say very simplistically that 5% of the population had killed 95% of the population, or replaced them, as we say. So this type of, women are the most important resources for which men compete. Everything else is on top of that: money, status, power games. It's for all organisms that the reproduction is the most fundamental task. It's just that humans have built so much more on top of that than the other species. But if we lose sight of the importance and centrality of reproduction and of having mating that functions and lets us reproduce our populations, we're doing ourselves a great disservice. And when we look back in the past and see how many different regimes we've had, and how human mating nature and male and female mate preferences play out in different environments, you see that things change quite a bit. But there are these underlying motivations that we have to be aware of now that we again have to create a new mating regime, so we don't go in those directions that have plagued particularly the American left, let's say, since the introduction of this regime, where there's been this push toward, well, let's just create non-biologically related families. Let's just come together and live in communes and have free love and take care of each other's children. I love that thought. That's the culture I grew up with. But we do have to consider the empirical findings too. Those experiments didn't play out that well, and they continue not to play out that well. That is probably not where we're going to find our solution to the challenges that we face today.
Okay, so a lot of things I want to respond to again. So that idea of sort of communal parenting, one of the things it fails to take into consideration, which makes it unlikely to succeed, is the like human nature of love for our offspring, right? The parental bonding, the oxytocin that's released. And it's like I believe some of the highest percentages of child abuse comes from a non-parent, like a step parent or a caregiver. They tend to be abusive to children more than parents do. And I've assumed that's partly because there's just this important biological care for our offspring that it's hard to replace just through an ideology. Would you agree with that? Is that part of?
Yeah, those numbers are bizarre in terms of your danger for severe abuse or murder, and that is multiplied by between 40 and 100 times. So having a non-biological parent increases the risk enormously. But still, they are relatively small numbers, so we shouldn't exaggerate that. But yeah, in terms of what you said earlier, in terms of being raised communally, not necessarily. I mean, what we evolved for was being raised communally in a sense. The forager mating cycle was 3 to 4 years. A strong love tends to last 12 to 18 months. So it seems that when we around 4 million years ago transitioned from a promiscuous mating regime to pair bonding, our feelings of love only evolved to help us through the offspring's most vulnerable phase. So a man and a woman would meet, and they would feel sexual attraction, romantic attraction. They would think it was a great idea to pair up, to have a child would be wonderful, and then to work together to protect the child, provide calories, and raise it when it's very young. But then it would, once it was old enough to kind of walk around, it could progress to communal rearing within your herd. Within your forager band. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah. So within the band. And I think that is one of the troubles we have today in terms of reproduction. We don't have support. Those of us who live in cities and have moved away from our family and kin networks to be here, we are very alone in the city. We don't have, not now we have daycares as a substitute for some hours, but not having an extended family to rely on or a group that can pitch in and help us, it leaves parents and especially single moms very isolated. And that imposes one of the many costs on reproduction that we didn't have in our ancestral environment. Back then, experts think that it was probably adaptive to break up after 3 to 4 years. It was better to have children with different fathers because you would get genetic variety. You would get a larger and stronger net of alliances. So that was how we made it during those 2 million years as genus Homo. And then with agriculture, that tied us to field. And you can't, in case of divorce, you can't just break up the fields in two and carry away your half. So that's when we developed the ideal of lifelong love. That was a necessity of the agricultural environment. And now that we've gotten out of this with urbanization and then with this new mating regime from the 1960s, we have reverted to our original pair bonding for which we evolved, which is serial pair bonding interspersed with opportunistic short-term relationships. But we also have contraceptives, so we can choose not to get pregnant through promiscuous sex. And we don't have that forager band to support us. Children have become very expensive. They stay with us for a long time. So there's so many benefits in today's environment to have a lifelong pair bond, to find someone and have several children with them and spend your entire life with them. If you can pull that off, there are so many social and economic benefits that it's a really good idea. But it's hard because your nature doesn't facilitate it. Your nature, your emotions help you get past 2, 3, 4 years. And then if you want it to last longer than that, there's some work to be done.
Mm-hmm. And so that's why, okay, so maybe that's part of why the value, like the externalized value from the church or from other institutions, sort of a societal expectation of lifelong pair bond was necessary to undergird the challenges of marriage, to keep marriages together or families together. Because I guess it's not the marriage.
That is the way I see it. The main function of culture is to coerce individuals into acting a way that their emotions try to make them not act, but to do this for the case of the community. So whatever the functionality of a community requires in a certain environment, that's what culture needs to program into you. So yes, and the Mormon Church has knocked that out of the park in terms of lifelong pair bonds and reproduction. That's a very effective culture for facilitating that. The Norwegian culture of today is not particularly effective at facilitating that. And we're very happy with that because we love our freedoms, and we generally think Mormons are strange for being so happy and successful. But in the long run, those who reproduce survive, and those who don't disappear.
Right. Okay. And I find myself wanting to push back on your language sometimes when you say words like coerce, because it does sound to me like it misses something that I think it the way it frames it makes it appear negative, right? Like we have to coerce people to do things, because I think it's like I have to coerce my children, if we want to say that, to do things that lead to their long-term well-being and their long-term happiness, right? My children might like to just lay in bed and eat candy, and I have to coerce them to not do that. But I prefer the language of like, I have to teach them or encourage behaviors and understanding that will lead to a longer-term well-being, because and longer term, I think longer term both in the life of the human, because I don't tend to think that serial pair bonding or promiscuous mating tends to lead to the most happiness for the greatest number of people. I think that it tends to not to do that, but then also the well-being of the community, as you said. I'm curious about how like it doesn't feel like coercion as much as understanding that, to use a religious term, by their fruit ye shall know them. And in some ways, this little magical period we had of I know people have gotten in trouble for using the term enforced monogamy, but it just means the societal expectation of monogamy leads to incredible, like you said, we have the ability to sit and talk to each other. We have this amazing culture and these that we have because of enforced monogamy, because of this societal expectation of long-term pair bonding and co-parental investment in children that leads to a lot of satisfaction for many people. Of course, there are, I do think that it's important to allow for divorce, but I think that prioritizing the understanding that, you have hurdles, there are hard times in your marriage, but boy, when you get past those, there's so much deeper satisfaction and bonding and unity than you would have in a shorter term relationship, that it's worth really trying for that. That's something I'm glad that has been part of my society to help me understand that, because it has, marriage is hard. I absolutely will acknowledge that. And parenting can be hard, but the satisfaction and joy that comes from real recognizing that it's worth the investment is really something sad. It's sad to me that people seem to not be aware of that.
One of the main issues here is that we become blind to our own culture. We kind of see it as air. We just take it for granted. So one of the arguments in this low fertility debate is that and this is quite common across the West, also in Norway, that it's highly inappropriate to try to influence individuals' choices. So I bring the attention to how modern dating markets make it hard for women to find someone with whom they can pair bond. Then people think, well, but we have to have a regime where women take their own choices individually because we're the most hyper-individualistic culture that ever existed, the modern West. We don't understand that the environment we have created comes with impulses that interact and influence our mating preferences and mating nature in a way that makes us take certain choices. Whereas if we were in a different environment, we would act differently. So there's no neutral environment where you have autonomous individuals making rational choices. So the question we have to ask then is, what society do we want? Do we want reproduction and pair bonding? Do we want monogamy? Do we want promiscuity, polygamy? What do we want? And then we have to create, and this is what we've always done. You have very often artists and writers, they dream up how they want. And this is what in stories of love from Vikings to Tinder, I analyzed works of literature through this period to see how they deal with these new ideologies, the transitions between them, and how they think new. And then you see the societies over the next decade working toward this vision, like we did with confluent love. We worked toward that for, I could say, over 2 centuries. We worked to create this regime, this environment where men and women were free to choose their own partners. That took a lot. I would say it was one of the, I would claim that it is perhaps one of the main motivations for modernity. It was in the ability to get individual partner choice. That's been a strong drive in the West for the past millennium. So being afraid of cultural changes or policies that create new impulses, that's not indoctrinating people necessarily or taking away their freedoms or depriving women of choice. It's just that in the environment we have now, women have all the power on the short-term market, and many use it to give an extraordinary amount of attention to the most attractive males. That results in a lot of dating and sex with higher value males. But because those males aren't willing to pair bond with the women with lower mate value, an increasing number of women end up single, without family, without children, and they're unhappy with that. And then we have to, and then the question isn't, are we going to, like on incel forums, some men argue that there should be government mandated policies where women are not allowed to sleep with men who are more attractive than them. Of course, I don't believe in that at all. We shouldn't start prohibiting or forcing women from doing anything. But if we can create dating arenas where women get a chance to spend more time with men with similar mate value over a longer period of time, and they meet enough of those men, that will drastically increase their chances for forming a pair bond and thus being in a position to have children if they choose to do so. So it's not about forcing people or culturally indoctrinating them. It's about deciding what kind of society we want, and then reverse engineering to try to think what kind of environment do we have to build to have that society, to get the outcomes we want, and then build those impulses into the system.
Okay, and then also see, and I like the thinking about sort of the structural changes that can be sort of imposed by government. But what I'm hearing also is, it sounds to me like there's a huge need for, I don't mean to use a condescending word, but education, because I think many of these women are not, many women maybe just don't understand the things that were part of my culture to understand, right? Like when women are in the dating market and not maybe fully aware of the short-term nature of their high status, right? And it's not even a really high status, it's just the difference between men and women that, like, and I don't want to impose my perspective on other women, but my general understanding and my belief is that women generally do want to pair bond, and that usually when they are sleeping around, they're thinking, this is my way to pair bonding, without being aware that actually, no, you are like the men, the high value men, the high status men who are sleeping with the 80% of women, you know, they have very different ideas of where this will go, of what the long-term outcomes will be. And so women, it feels to me, spend all of these years sleeping around looking for that guy, only to realize, oh, now I don't have the same market value. But these are horrible terms to use, but I don't have the same value in the dating market, right? And so I have even less opportunity for sleeping around, less opportunity for pair bonding, and zero opportunity for motherhood. And that seems like a tragedy that has been sort of imposed on women through these modern values that do not serve women well, that women don't understand in time often.
Yeah, because we've only had this regime for 50 years, and it's the first time in human history we haven't developed the cultural scripts that we should instill into our children so that they can understand this market. So it's very confusing, and people don't like to talk about it. It's kind of an uncomfortable topic. So we haven't been able to spread this insight. So yeah, there's a lot of confused women there. And I wrote an article. I published an article earlier this year where I coined the term insinks, the female counterpart to incels, involuntary single women. and show there. And it's important to stress that what you said earlier, I mean, that's not universal. Many women on occasion or for longer periods of time do pursue promiscuous mating and find that highly rewarding. They might come out of a long-term relationship and want to sleep around a bit, and they enjoy that. But what many women are becoming traumatized by now is that when they pursue that strategy, they are at the same time also looking for a boyfriend. So you could say, yeah, sometimes women just want promiscuous sex, but it is very common that their involvement on the short-term market is a long-term strategy. But then with the technologies we have now, we've opened up this market in a way that if you enter it without understanding how it works and how mate values work and what the difference is on the power differential between short and long-term mating, it's easy for women to get traumatized because they spend year after year after year dating and having sex with these attractive men who are never willing to commit. And I've cited many Norwegian women who've written in the media of the past year how men are immature, they don't want to commit, they don't want something challenging, they just want to sleep around. And that's not true. It's just a very small proportion of men who get to sleep around, who women consider to be good enough for the short-term mating market. And those men have many options. And if you as a man have 15, 20, 30, 40 new sex partners a year, of course you're not going to be the boyfriend of every single one of them. So I use as an illustration in that article a Swedish novel written by Amanda Romer. When she turned 30, she decided to get a partner, a life partner. So she thought she'd have to go on, meet 5-6 men, and then she would find someone to spend a significant amount of her life with. And after 2 years, she had sex with 50 men, and not a single one of them invited her for a second date. And that, I argue, is a consequence of the power that women have on apps like Tinder and in real life. So the numbers for Tinder, some studies suggest that what happens is that when the average woman goes on Tinder, the first thing she does is to delete 95% of men. They do not get to exist for mating as potential mates. So 95% of the profiles are just gone. The 5% that she finds most attractive are the ones that she's willing to communicate with on Tinder. And then in the next filtration, before she meets them in real life, out of those 5% that remain, 98% is filtered out. And then when she meets them in real life, out of those, 80% are filtered out before she has sex with a man. And this isn't the most attractive women. This is the average women who impose on the male dating pool of filtration. Well, first, there's already as filtration where if you're not attractive enough as a man on Tinder, you're probably not going to be there too long because you're not going to achieve anything. There's probably an overrepresentation of attractive men on Tinder to begin with, which is another filtration. But then the filtration is 95%, 98%, and 80%. And then you have to ask yourself, as the average woman who does this, what are the chances that if the man that you're sitting across from had the same power as you have, would you get through that filtration? It's a pretty strong filtration. And somehow thinking that those men are representative of men in general, or that those men would be willing to pair bond with a random woman who just selected him for sex, it's just unlikely. Women to pair bond have to date and meet men of similar values themselves, and they have to give themselves time. It's if the promiscuous attraction system is very quick, you can see someone and they're hot, and you go, I want to have sex with them. I want to have sex with that guy because he's so hot. It's very quick to find out. Then you have to talk to him a little bit to see if he's off or if you're compatible. And it's a pretty quick system. Often when you fall in love, a woman has to meet a man several times to discover that to get to know him better and to see that there's something there that you connect to in a romantic way. And modern dating and modern technologies don't facilitate that. If you're a low value man and you put your photos and your text on Tinder, it's very hard for a woman to fall in love with an average man through a cell phone. It's the technology just doesn't facilitate it. So we've created this system with women like Amanda Romer, and I've known many women like this. They go through years of dating and just end up thinking that men are just not serious. They don't understand why these men only want sex and these situationships instead of pair bonding. And if we can increase the awareness of how women have this amazing power on the short-term market, all women have basically unlimited access to sex with as many men as they want, and often men that are a lot more attractive than them, while most men do not have access to the short-term market. And if they understood that, then yes, they can, if they want to pursue promiscuous sex for a period of their life. That's a wonderful privilege to have, but it's not a good strategy if your ultimate goal is to pair bond, which it is for most men and women.
Okay. So, there's so much to everything you say. It makes my mind go a million directions. But it's a couple of things. It seems to me that I'm what I'm wondering about is this idea of sort of enforced monogamy. That's I wish we had better terms for many of these things. But the societal standard of pair bonding and monogamy, and then. It seems to me not to be coincidental, possibly, that sex being bound within marriage was part of the magic that made that work, right? When we did have this societal expectation for monogamy, it didn't couple well with what we could term promiscuity, which is like sleeping around before getting married. And that's kind of, I think we're in this time where there's this hybrid expectation where it's like we want marriage, but we want to sleep around first, or we think sleeping around is the way to attain marriage. And what we're finding is that maybe, or what my mind is thinking about is that maybe this idea of marriage is sort of a relic of the past model we had, where there was an expectation of chastity before marriage and fidelity within marriage. So the expectation was not only that you would be married to one partner for your whole life, but you would only have sex with one partner for at least the majority of your life. And so we still had that expectation, but thought, but we can sleep around first. But really, those are different systems, different games that maybe don't blend well together. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, the challenge there is the difference between men and women's promiscuous attraction system. For men, as they evolved, it was beneficial for their genetic legacy to sleep around a lot. If men were able to have promiscuous sex, they had a chance to make women pregnant. And even though they didn't make any paternal investment, a certain percentage of those children would grow up and have children on their own. It would promote the legacy. For women, that was not the case. They can only have one child per year, say. And so for them, the most important thing was to ensure genetic quality if the man wasn't going. So either find a man with whom they can pair bond, who will protect her and provide calories and invest in the child. But if she's not going to get that, the best strategy is just to go for the best genes. So men's promiscuous attraction system is very generous and inclusive. Most men perhaps want to sleep with most women, because that was beneficial in our evolutionary past. Now it's been reconnected from reproduction, but that hasn't changed our emotions to that great an extent. While women, when it comes to sex, only want to have sex with a very small proportion of men. Women aren't sexually attracted to men. If anything, women more generally feel repulsion at the thought of sex with a random man, while a man would be excited by the thought of sex with a random woman. So if you have a promiscuous system like we have today, to a great extent, most mating opportunities will be channeled to the very most attractive men, because those are the men who are able to arouse that sexual lust in women due to an attraction system that is millions and millions of years old. I mean, the utopia of confluent love, the regime we live in now, is that if we only free us from old oppressive culture, often understood as the church, then men and women will be free to live out their erotic and romantic desires. We just needed to get rid of the oppression. Mm-hmm. So now we've done that, and the result, it's quite the opposite. Most men have no or minimal access to the short-term mating market. They do not get to live out their erotic desires. And men have a much higher desire for that than women. So in Norway, according to one study, women want to have 5 sex partners in a lifetime, while men want 25. It's just their promiscuous attraction system is stronger, more generous. Well, not necessarily stronger. That's the wrong word. Women, and we studies show that when women meet a man that is exceptionally attractive, she is as aroused as men are when they meet women that are exceptionally attractive. While when women meet average men, they're much less interested than if a man meets an average woman. And in Norway, which is a very feminist country, women also in those situations pursue the man more strongly than a man would if he met an exceptionally attractive woman. So in this system that we thought well, at least the utopia portrayed, everybody would live in this erotic romantic paradise. Instead, we see that women get to sleep around as much as they like, but they don't value it as much as men would if they had the chance. And over time, if that is all they get, that tends to many women to become quite traumatic because they get rejected after having sex and feel that they're not good enough to be anybody's girlfriend, or there's something wrong with men. And then this makes more difficult the process of pair bonding, so that both men and women have increasing single rates. It's so sky high compared to previous times, in most senses. So nobody's winning. You could say perhaps the high value men at the top win by getting a chance to have sex with more than 100 women in their lifetime. And we don't need to go too much into what could be adverse about that, because it's kind of a complex topic. But it's not given that this is a great victory for those men either. And what we see as a result now, an alarming number of young people are pulling out of mating altogether. Out of young single Americans, more than half say that they don't either want sex or a relationship. Dating has just become so dysfunctional and unpleasant for both men and women that they're just withdrawing. They don't want to deal with it anymore, and that affects pair bonding, which again affects family forming and fertility. So we have a mating market now that is highly dysfunctional for a large part of the population.
Yes, absolutely, and that is such a tragedy, because really, human flourishing kind of also comes from human striving, right? And one of the reasons that we are accomplishment-oriented people is because of pair bonding. Is because, right? Like for men, often achieving a driving motivation for men to become their best selves, to accomplish as much as they can, is to attract a mate. It seems to me, right? And so
it's the main motivation. It's the primary motivation. It's the deepest motivation.
Yes. And so if we remove that, what we have created is hopelessness rather than striving. Yep. And that does not bode well for society. Like, this seems to me to be destructive on every single level for individuals as well as for our communities and society, because at some point, the men that have sort of just settled in the hopelessness, right? How long does it take till they form whatever it was you talked about, the roaming bands of single men who can attack? And do you know what I mean? Like, we're being held together by this thin veneer of social, mores of what still is seen as acceptable. It's not acceptable to go attack the neighboring community and take the women, right? But yeah, we have broken down so many of our social mores and what is seen as acceptable that we are kind of hanging on it's kind of like we are, we have the corpse of our old values that we're still existing off of, but we have to either come up with something better, or, we're in a really precarious situation, it seems to me, not only for our demography, for our reproduction rates, but in many different ways because of what we have done to pair bonding, as I see it. I think that what you're talking about with this, with Tinder, it is really interesting, because when I think about being in college, which was the old way to date when I was in college, and sure, you would see that really cute guy, but if he didn't ask you out, you weren't going to go out with him, right? Like, you did just kind of settle into, you'd get asked out by a lot of guys you might not be that interested in. You'd go out with them, but there'd be then that magic moment where someone you're interested in asks you out, and you kind of settle in where you align. And so it did work when we were actually, it wasn't enforced. It was just, you were more aware of what kind of guys were attracted to you, what kind of guys, and the guys got a sense of what women should I ask out, because, it just had to work out that way. And you kind of naturally settled into where you could find a pair bond, where on Tinder, like you're talking about, women aren't having that, like everybody's an option on Tinder. So women can only choose that one most attractive guy. And we've broken something really important. And anyway, so I guess I'm just, I don't know if you have anything to respond to from what I've just been talking about.
So that was three aspects, and we'll take it in the opposite chronological direction. So it absolutely is enforced. It's social enforcement. So if when you're in social circles, women's choices were restricted in different ways. One was through slut shaming. So if you're in college and you sleep with 50 men and everybody knows about it, your chances of finding a high value husband will diminish because you will get a bad reputation. So there's reputational damage. Dating today there's a tendency for it to go underground. A Swedish sociologist written about this, and women who when they go date and sleep around and often then get rejected postcoitally by these men, they don't want any of their friends to know about their dates. They don't get to see them. It's dating has become private. It used to be a social act in social arenas. Now it's removed out of people's social circles, so they can't afflict social pressure on them. And before also, the hottest guy at college, if he's at a party, he can mostly only flirt and invest in one woman, and maybe he can bring her home that night if he's successful. And if you're an average woman in a party setting, if it's a highly attractive man goes for you, then that can harm his partner value in some way, while people seeing that he goes for women of lesser value. That's not an issue today. You can, as a woman, go on Tinder and select the very most attractive men, and they will compete very hard for an opportunity to have sex with you. And those men can also keep, and so even though that it doesn't have the same potential for reputational damage for a man's partner value as it has for a woman from this act, it's just that he now, instead of having to pick one woman in a social setting, he can groom a large amount of women and then meet them sequentially. So it's just things have become much more easier and underground with technology. Now let's jump one back to these roving bands of men. David Buss and William Costello, two evolutionary psychologists, launched a very interesting hypothesis recently called the male sedation hypothesis. So they believe that the reason we don't have roaming bands of unmarried men is it's porn, internet porn, and gaming, where these men can find a substitute satisfaction sexually and status-wise online. So that could be quite beneficial for societies, although it's perhaps quite dystopic for individuals. And then to jump and one more step back, what does this sexual stratification do to men? I've tried in Norway. We're very concerned with this. So we've had in this century 3 government commissions that try to find out why more and more men are becoming losers, while they're becoming marginalized, while they're falling behind women in so many aspects of society. The most prominent, of course, being education, where there's so many more women taking higher education than men. And it's just, you have all these areas in life where you say, well, men just fall further and further behind. And we're trying to figure this out. We had 3 commissions, and I've tried to influence them. I've tried to speak out, and not a single one of them allowed the commission or were willing to study dating and mating and sexual stratification. And all 3 of them came up with, no, it's a complete puzzle. So the first one said that, well, men aren't marginalized, and to the extent they're marginalized, it's because they're not feminist enough. Then the second one said that, yeah, men are marginalized. We have no idea why. And then the third one, I thought would at least come with some suggestions. And they just said, no, they're not feminist enough. So, yeah, it's really difficult in a feminist society as ours. And I applaud it. Feminism has done great things for Norway, but it does come with a lot of blind spots. You need other theoretical frameworks if you want to understand male marginalization. And I mean, men and women exist separately for sexual reproduction. And for most species, including humans, women perform the sexual selection. So nothing is more important for a male organism than the ability to pass the test of sexual selection and have an opportunity to have sex, to become a boyfriend, to become a father, to be part of a family. That is the deepest foundation of our organism. And now that more and more men are excluded from sex, from dating, from relationship, from fatherhood and families, we would absolutely, from an evolutionary perspective, expect these men to become demotivated, to start pulling out, to not trying their hardest. Men try hard to increase their status, to accumulate resources, precisely to achieve that aspect of life. And if that becomes too unattainable, we would expect to see exactly the type of male marginalization that we're experiencing in Norway now, and that I expect only to get worse. But instead, we're looking at all kinds of other weird stuff, and we don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. But yeah, we have every reason to think that male stratification on mating markets is the prime driver of male marginalization in today's societies.
And okay, but people will not look at it, will not acknowledge it because it's uncomfortable. And another challenge that I think is this. See, I guess a lot of it, to me, it is the challenge of how to blend these different ideologies, because a lot of the men who are, resorting to porn and gaming and have given up on the dating market, it's not like they are just wanting to pair bond, right? I think there is this idea of those guys get to sleep around, I should get to sleep around. And so sort of they have the worst of both worlds often, where they're not wanting to become a man who could attract a mate and shoulder the responsibility of being a husband and a father. They instead are just resentful that they're not the one at the top of the market who's sleeping with everybody.
Yeah. The numbers show that there's an increasing marginalization, meaning that let's just make a very simplistic line. Let's say there's 20% high value men and 80% low value men. And we see that for the top 20%, their mating opportunities keep increasing. But according to at least one study, the bottom 80% sees the exact same reduction in mating opportunities that the top 20% experience. So there are fewer and fewer mating opportunities for low value men, but other studies show that they at the same time, because we live in such a promiscuous society and there's such a high number of single women, their mating nature, their mating psychology responds by desiring more promiscuous sex. So yes, you're absolutely right. Also, low value men have this expectation of being allowed to be a part of this wonderful new world that we have, where people can sleep around and it's a good thing and it's fun and you don't face social sanctions. It's just that it's not available for them. But that is an environment that also compels them to place a higher primacy on this and to try harder, and because in the ideology of confluent love is that in romantic love we're supposed to self-realize through a lifelong pair bond through the breadwinner housewife model. With confluent love we're supposed to self-realize not only on the long-term market but on the short-term market. And if you as a man is not able to get laid in today's world with Tinder, you have no places to hide. You are a loser. In earlier times, you had excuses. If you're a Mormon man, I would imagine, and you're not sleeping around, you're a moral man, somewhat of a hero, perhaps. You're a decent man. In Norway, you're a man, and you're on. And I mean, people know this. They can't hide. They're on Tinder. They see that they get no opportunities. There's nowhere to hide. They're not a good Christian. They're not a good Mormon. They're not a moral person, or they're not someone who's fortunate to avoid STDs. They're just a loser. Someone who's been marginalized by women, somebody whom women consider not to be good enough. And that's a tough blow to your ego. That goes very, very deep. We've just removed the cultural adaptations that allowed men who fail at the short-term mating market to still feel kind of good with themselves. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the short-term market is an entry point to the long-term market. Before that wasn't the case. People could sleep around clandestinely, and then there was, there's maybe their family, maybe their society got involved in their mating. So it was kind of like you maybe didn't have sex before you got married. That's not the case today. If you can't get a woman to bed, she is not going to be your girlfriend. So if you don't succeed on the short-term mating market, you will not succeed on the long-term mating market. And that is hard for men. It's the amount of competition that we impose on men now. What men have to go through, regular men have to go through to succeed on those markets, it's hard on them. It's really hard. And then the really ugly part is that those men who are excluded for both short and long-term mating, so-called incels, we villainize them. Those men that, due to our regime now, don't get access to what could easily be argued the most important parts of life, well, we paint them as misogynistic potential terrorists sitting in the mother's basement writing hateful online threads about women. That's not the case at all. They're normal men who don't hate women more than other men. They're just men who are excluded from mating, and instead of showing them sympathy, I mean, we're not going to fix it. Women are not going to start sleeping with them. But as a minimum, we should show them sympathy instead of painting them as evil terrorists. Because, I mean, we're the ones. This is our mating regime. We're the one who's doing this to these men. So at least we could look them in the eyes and say, we're really sorry and we feel with you, and it sucks that your life is going to be this miserable. but that's just the mating regime we have, and you have to suffer it, but we feel with you. I mean, that's not optimal, but at least it's better to say that they're evil terrorists.
Okay. So I'm thinking about so many things because, yeah, like with our with the Mormon fundamentalist communities, where there is officially recognized polygamy rather than this de facto default polygamy, we do talk about the lost boys with a lot of compassion, and we see it as a tragedy. But I think that we tend to be still in this standard of traditional. When I say traditional marriage, that can mean so many things, because I don't necessarily mean a full-time mother in the home, but I just mean like the idea of, you are pair bonded in a marriage, that you are expected that to be the sexual outlet for your life, right? And so we still have this model. So we see that as a tragedy, but what we really have, like we shouldn't call them incels, we should call them lost boys. That's what it is, because these polygamous relationships always result in the lost boys, and that's really what we're talking about. And
it sounds like the fundamentalist Mormon communities are a lot more compassionate towards low value men than what the modern societies are, because we really can't stand them.
It's not the fundamentalist communities. The fundamentalist communities kick them out. It's those of us that surround the fundamentalist communities. The fundamentalist communities kick them out. It's really, really sad. They'll, like these boys that have no training to succeed in the society, they are just like left by the side of the road by their parents.
Well, let's extend that thought. Let's look into the future. So why do high-value men and women put up with low-value men? Why do they get to exist? I mean, one of the defining features of Homo sapiens is that we live in multi-male, multi-female groups, yet have pair bonding. No one else pulls that off. So normally, if the high-value males, they will hoard the women and chase away the weak men, because they want the women to themselves.
Or they'll kill them. They'll send them to war or something. Okay, traditionally.
No, other species. We don't. If pair bonding species don't allow single men to hang around, but we do. And if you look at the modern environment, we need everyone. We live in nation states. Nation states need bodies for production and protection. We need them as workers and soldiers. If we imagine a world, and now just to play where our current ideology might take us, in a world of AI and automation, where we're not providing materially for ourselves, nor providing our own protection, what incentives would high-value men and women have for keeping low-value men around? I mean, today in Norway, we need them as tax cattle. Men pay more in taxes than they receive from the welfare state. Women receive more than 1.2 million over a lifetime that they pay in taxes. So these low-value men who are without mating opportunities, they still, through their labor, contribute to reproduction. If we have the view we have on low-value men today, and we in the future are able to create self-chosen communities, because we don't need, I mean, the nation state is a construct for our era that we need for historical reasons, and that means having a lot of bodies. But yeah, I don't know why would women allow low-value men in their communities in the future if they're not needed for labor or protection? I mean, out of human concerns, that would be nice, but human concerns, that's a euphemism for modern Western ideology. And if we transition from that ideology to one more adapted to tomorrow's environment, we could go in directions that people today at least would find very unpleasant, but which in the future might feel natural for those people that are creating those communities.
That's I guess these are the concerns. It's easy to take for granted the values that have been handed down to us by this sort of I mean, it is interesting to me that people view it as the church imposed. We just need to get rid of these imposed cultural norms that the church has imposed on us without recognizing. I'm not saying that power structures don't get tyrannical. Of course, the church could be too tyrannical. But what I think that is they're failing to recognize is the problem that the church was solving, right? That like these human nature problems, that these structures that we just see as tyrannical might be there to facilitate. They might be helping us and blessing us, not controlling us, right? And so we throw off the shackles that have bound us without recognizing the hellscape that awaits us when we haven't, when we don't know what those are protecting us from. The cartoon of the animals cutting the limb, right, that they're sitting on comes to mind, that we don't recognize what we have created and what we've done. So I have many other things I would like to talk to about this. I do think one interesting thing is that it is the polygamous societies that don't have the value for the boys they want to get rid of, to save, so that all of the high status men can marry all of the little girls that should be marrying those young men. So they get rid of them. And it's the society surrounding that has compassion for them. And one thing that makes me think is that it is so really in this, like in the Norwegian society, it sort of is the society that doesn't have value for those low status men. So it would have to be surrounding. It's very difficult for the society that is in the society itself to have compassion for the men that are not having mating opportunities. Just like the polygamous societies can't have compassion for the lost boys, they have to vilify them enough to be able to justify kicking them out. And it seems like the same thing is kind of happening. And yeah, who knows where that could go as soon as it becomes logical to.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting perspective, that because we do have a de facto polygamous regime in the modern world, it is necessary that we villainize the victims of that order. Otherwise, we are oppressors. But if we define those men that we discriminate, marginalize, and shut out of these markets as evil, women-hating potential terrorists, then we're doing a good deed by keeping the boot on them.
Yeah, we can justify ourselves.
That's a very interesting perspective. So let me offer you an argument for why I think polygyny could be in our future and part of the solution, although I don't support it personally. So what come up in the debate that has been raging in Norway for the past half year is that women generally find that men aren't good enough. This is the phrase they keep using. So my point was that when I first I came with the article about instincts, and then the book Stories of Love from Vikings to Tinder. And yeah, by the way, to your listeners, that book is open access. So if you Google Stories of Love from Vikings to Tinder and you go to Taylor and Francis, the publisher's website, you can just download it for free.
We'll have also links below so that people can access it. Just look at the description box and we'll have the link there.
Wonderful. So women's attraction to men, here we have to understand this difference between the highly discriminative promiscuous attraction system and the more egalitarian pair bonding attraction system. That difference between those two with women, that it's not the same with men. We have to bear that in mind. Women's attraction to men evolved in very impoverished environments where having a man was highly useful for calorie protection, other reasons. So women's attraction men only needed to be strong enough for that environment. In the modern environment, women have become independent, and nowhere more so than in Norway. They have their own jobs that pay more or less as well as men's jobs, so they can support themselves. And in addition, they get $1.2 million from the government.
No, wait, let me pause on that. So even not as mothers, women are just given money by the.
No. This is on average. It's an average number. So the average Norwegian woman. I mean, there are many women, I'm sure, who pay more in taxes than they get in benefit, but on average, each woman gets 1.2, over 1.2.
Okay, so we're just saying women are completely independent and don't need a man for any financial reason. Okay.
Yeah, they support themselves and the government supports them. So men and women have always had two different fundamental evolutionary challenges. For men, the challenge has always been to gain access to female sexuality. That's always been the main challenge. For women, for the past 4 million years, the main challenge has been to gain access to men's resources because they needed it. Our offspring became so dependent, so needy, our heads got so large that they needed men's resources. And we've solved in Norway women's fundamental evolutionary challenge. They now have create their own resources, and they get access to men's resources through the welfare state. What we would strongly predict that this would result in women finding men less attractive, or finding a larger number of men not attractive enough. Women's love for men, well, let's take men. Men evolved a love for women so that men would stick around through the pregnancy and the offspring's most vulnerable years. Women developed a love for men to facilitate access to men's resources. So it's not like women are gold diggers who just want men for their money, but those genuine feelings that they have, they evolved to trigger that paternal investment. So that when men's resources are no longer needed, naturally men will appear less attractive. So what we're dealing with now, and we see this across the world, that as we gain gender equality, women exclude a larger and larger proportion of men from their potential pool of candidates. And then if you also have high income inequality, women discriminate even more strongly because those men at the top become more valuable. So if we are in a society now, let's use Norway as an example, because we're so on the forefront in terms of gender equality and these economic mechanisms. When women don't need men for their resources, they're in a very different situations what our feelings evolved for. And then when we also live in these prosperous societies, we switch to what's called a slow life strategy. We invest more, we raise our demands, we're trying to get more out of life, to achieve more. And then women will naturally be incentivized to start directing their dating efforts at the most attractive men. And those least attractive men will seem appalling and not worth any effort at all, where it will be better to be single than to be with a man of low value. Given this situation we have created, if more and more men simply aren't good enough for women, yes, we could do backward-looking things that I am very much against. We could impose poverty on people. We could give more money to men to make them more attractive. There are all sorts of things we could do to go backwards. But I'm thinking that's not where we're headed. I think we're going to move forwards, and those trends we see in society today are just going to be stronger in the future. So let's say then, if 50% of men, or 70 or 30% of men, if a large proportion of men aren't good enough, perhaps women want to start sharing men through polygynous pair bonds. What we have today is temporal polygamy. So let's say if you're a man in the highest income bracket in Norway, you have a 90% chance of being pair bonded by age 40. If you're in the lowest income bracket, you have a 40% chance. So instead of women marrying a man, having children, and then being left by him and having the family broken up so he can find a younger woman, and then him do the same for a third round later, maybe women want to share these men polygamously at the same time so they can keep their families intact. That's not for me to say. I have no preference. I think that would be terrible for low-value men. But women have the power. If this is what they want and this is what it takes to have them reproduce, I'm perfectly open to women implementing this. So I could see a new role for a kind of matriarchal polygamy, almost, where women call the shots, but where they decide to share a high-value man, 2, 3, 4 women, because they would rather share a high-value man than have exclusive access to a low-value man that they feel isn't good enough for them. So I could see that. Yeah. I could see that opening for polygamy in the future. Question though is, would these high-value men want that? How many modern men want to live in a family with 3 women? I think that's more limited than what was the case 1,000 years ago.
I think that, like, where I think I would push back on that, even as a possibility, is the idea of a matriarchal polygamy, because it doesn't. It would be hard for me to see a high value man. A high value man is high value because he has the power, and that's why he can attract multiple mates. And what we see with polygamy is it is a power imbalance. The man has the power, the women have less power, which is why we get these, in fundamentalist communities, these ideas of keep sweet. A woman's only value is to keep sweet, right? She doesn't get to have opinions. She doesn't get to have feelings. I'm curious. I can see what you're saying if there isn't a financial component to it, but I just think it's so unwise. I guess it's like A woman who is married to a man who then brings on another wife is discarded just as if he had left, right?
Yeah.
It's not it's not like it's not keeping the family together more than a divorce would in many ways. I mean, I know that fundamentalists will push back on me, but we also have to recognize there's a huge difference between polygamy and Mormon fundamentalism that is religiously motivated, right? These are gods in the making. These men are breeding their way into exaltation, into godhood, and so they have this high value of what this means for them. But even there, still there are these discarded women. Like women have a horrible time, even in religious polygamy. It's hard for me to see women being satisfied or men being amenable to actual polygamy. It seems to revert. It is like polygamy is a very much misogynistic society, but actually in a lot of ways, even though this is a lot for me to wrap my head around. I wish that we could talk again in the future after I thought about some of these things before, but really this default polygamy is also quite misogynistic in many ways, because the high status men are just seeing women as sexual opportunities with no value for the individual woman, right? Yeah, I'll sleep with her tonight. Who cares? There's no cost for me. You know, Heather Haying and Brett Weinstein talk about gamete size, which is really what we're talking about. It's the investment, like our attractions grow out of our investment in our risk and our investment, right? For a woman, sex is a much more costly endeavor than it is for a man, which explains a lot of this. So these high value men that can sleep with all of these women are quite misogynistic, actually, right? Because they are just taking advantage of the woman without recognizing that the reason the woman is sleeping with them is because of her fantasy of becoming in a pair of him becoming her boyfriend. That's usually. Does that make sense? Like, it's not like we are really egalitarian or feminist in this way of mating. It is so broken that it doesn't serve anybody well. And so that's what I really want to tap into that to try to understand better for myself what solutions could be, because I would rather have more bottom up solutions, more education and empowerment for people and helping them understand rather than enforcing it through, or even not enforcing, facilitating through government action, especially when you have a government that is unwilling to even speak the problem. Like really saying that men who, the lost boys, if we want to call them that their problem is they're not feminist enough. That is just insane.
Yeah, in the latest report, one of the few advices they have was that we needed more male nurses.
Oh, great. Okay. That's great. We can have male nurses, but that doesn't solve the mating problem.
That would solve a different. Yeah, we need nurses, so it would solve the nursing problem, but not necessarily the mating problem. No, it's interesting to think about. Given if we accept that, we would expect men to be less attractive now that women don't need them, and women in Norway have been very clear and condescending and partially hateful and. In terms of how bad men are, and if we that's just a fact. So if men aren't good enough, and if women aren't going to share the high value men through polygamy, maybe cloning then. What do you think? If we do a genocide on the low value men and we clone the good ones, I've also suggested if there are any countries in the world where Norwegian women think there are good enough men. We have a great economy. Maybe we can import these men for Norwegian women. But somehow we have to get to the point where we reproduce or we will disappear. So I don't know. Cloning is a bit, it's a bit far into the future also, I suspect. So this is what's one of the fascinating aspects of this. There are no solutions that are palatable. There's nothing we can do that works that we would be willing to do, which makes it obvious to me that we have to keep this conversation going to find new solutions.
Well, you know what? One thing I think that it is interesting to talk about how, like, the reason men have become less attractive is because part of what was attractive about a man was he would provide for you. He would protect you, right? That was part of the package that you were getting. And so if we remove that part of it, then there's less that he can bring to the table. But still, this recognition of being able to find a man, like I don't even think this is an individual thing. I think that women and men have what is it I'm trying to say? still, what men bring to the table is the opportunity to have a pair bond, to have a marriage, and to have a family, and to have children, right? And so that should be part of what is attractive about men. And I think this idea that men aren't good enough, it really is quite hateful, because this is the fact. Dating is frustrating. And I wasn't in the dating market that long. I got married quite young. Right. But so the more time you're spending in the dating market, the more frustrating it can be. But you're not necessarily open or looking for. I guess what I'm saying is, if you think that 1% of 1% of men is who you expect to be with and everybody else is not good enough, that is really, really broken. The average man is considered worthless. Right. And so there has to be a way to help. I don't know. It just seems like this does seem to be, okay, here we are about in the second generation of this sort of promiscuous way of looking for a pair bonding. And it seems that we have come to an evolutionary dead end already, right? This can't reproduce itself. So we have to find
unless we
different.
solve it, it is absolutely an evolutionary dead end. Yes. Yeah. And it's with this, and I have enormous sympathy for women, and I do not blame women at all. Women have no more power over their choices as a group than what men have. So recently, this Norwegian woman wrote in the newspaper that the world has a man problem, making all men responsible for what all other men did on the planet. I do not think that way. That tends to lead, that has a tendency sometimes to lead to genocide. It's not a good way of thinking about groups. And I don't think that way about women at all. It's just that, and I've had so many female friends that have experienced that if you have spent the last 10 years on Tinder, dating and sleeping around with and socializing with, say, the top percent or the top few percentiles of men, then having to reorient yourself to pair bond with someone of similar mate value as you have can be so painful. These are men you would immediately swipe left on Tinder. You would never go on a date with them. You would never consider them for sex. They don't have the looks, the personality, the charm, the social circle, sometimes the success of those men you're used to.
Well,
so then having to stop being with those high value men to find someone at your own level, for many women, it feels like you're selling out, you're losing yourself, you're giving up, you're making an undue compromise. When women have what it does to you to spend 10 years on a mating market with men that are far more attractive than you, women are able to do it. Most of my female friends have been able to do it, but it's a painful process. I feel really sorry for them when they have to go through that.
Okay, that's so interesting, because I do hear this really a lot of care about, we can't blame women, but there's not an equal, we can't blame men. There's like, no, it's all men's fault. Let's go ahead and blame men, but we have to be, I don't want to blame anyone. I just want to look at it. I'm not saying we should blame women. It is interesting how this ideology is so careful about the feelings of women, but has very little empathy, like it has very little care for the feelings of men. That's interesting to me, why there isn't more equal care. And honestly, when you've had to sell a home and how painful it is every time you have to cut the price because the housing market is falling out. It's kind of reminding me of that. And I know this is a bad analogy, but you kind of adjust, right? You kind of go, oh, I had unrealistic expectations, so I need to adjust, because we are like allowed to just say these are low value men, but we're not allowed to say these are lower value women, right? That women are dating up and it's creating a false expectation. But there are so many men who you would not like on Tinder, you're not going to recognize their value. When I met my husband, the value that I found in him, I wouldn't have seen on Tinder. Right. And I fell head over heels for him, and we've kept our marriage together, even though marriage is hard. Right. And so that's what is unfortunate, is there are different things that people bring to the table. And it's like, I don't know, how do we get away from the Tinder dating market? Is Tinder really that big? Is that the only way to meet people? Is the only way to meet people in these really toxic ways that create these false expectations, that is now just kind of broken the expectations of an entire society?
Yeah, and on the other side, low-value men become bitter. They see high-value men sleeping around with dozens and dozens of men, and they see that all their female friends have unlimited access to sex. And for the large majority of men, they have zero or minimal access to the short-term mating market.
I would say that also the lower value... Sorry, I'm sorry. I want to hear that. But I would also say the lower value women become bitter. That's what I'm hearing in this hatefulness toward men. There is this mutual bitterness of the people that aren't at the very top echelons of the dating pool. But go ahead. I apologize for interrupting.
Yeah, no, it's no. It's painful for men. It's painful for women. It's not ideal. But these are things we can do something about instead of assigning blame, which it's in line with Christian and modern thought. From an evolutionary perspective, I think more that men and women are born with a certain nature that play out differently in different environments. So we have to be careful what kind of environment we create. And the dating environment we've now created does not promote pair bonding and reproduction. So yeah, and what we know about how the pair bonding attraction system works with women, women need an opportunity to be around men with similar mate value over a prolonged period of time so they can discover something of them of value that they fall in love with. Tinder does not do that. So then the question is, do we want to create? So if we do want to create new dating arenas, I mean, we're not gonna force women at gunpoint to date men at their own level. It's just that if we can create attractive arenas where men and women can meet, as they used to do not that long ago, that would be a step in the right direction. But if you keep Tinder on the side of that, so that women get those experiences. I mean, for most women, I mean, people still file partners and have children. For most women, this is not a big problem. Women can sleep around very attractive men and then find a boyfriend later. It's not impossible, but we have to look at the totality of it, how it plays out at a group level, and just trying to change the culture in terms of less dating apps and more meeting people. And see if that over time can create a cultural change. Even creating that would probably just have a minor effect. I mean, this isn't something you can change overnight and suddenly get a bump back up to 2.1. We have to work on a lot of things. And I'm thinking that if we work on these things that are available and we talk about it, over time we'll see a cultural change and perhaps develop a new ideology of love that upvalues pair bonding and reproduction. And if we don't, we disappear.
Okay, my gosh, this is so useful. I just can't help but think that this does kind of keep sounding like almost a toxic marriage. You know, like the men are blaming the women are blaming the men, and we can't solve the problem because we're stuck in the blame game on a demographic societal level. And that's the worst possible way to go about this. But Mads, I'm so thankful for the work that you're doing and for coming and talking to me. I do want to learn more about this. I think it is fascinating and incredibly important. And I guess it's like all hands on deck. What are these solutions going to be? How are we going to?
Absolutely. And different cultures, different countries will experiment with different solutions, and most of them won't work. And I don't know, maybe you Mormons will come up with a solution, something that is compelling to other cultures as well, so we can adapt your adaptations. So yeah, people should reach into their cultural history to inspire them to experiment with new solutions, and let's just see what works.
Oh, I think that sounds great. And let's stop blaming each other, right? I love your focus on compassion for the downtrodden. It is really sad to see that. Anyway, that was one of the big ahas. I had several ahas in our conversation, like discoveries, but this idea that, polygamous societies cannot value the men that they need to discard in order to justify themselves.
And also it's important to have compassion for women in this situation, because if we perform a modern ideological analysis, women are to blame. They have the power. Their actions are creating this regime that is leading to self-eradication. That's the logical conclusion, but that's not how humans work. We're born with a nature that plays out differently in different environments, and now we have a certain environment that leaves women as a group with no choice but to act as they do. And nobody here created this environment. And those who came before us did. We were born into it. And now the question is, what kind of environment do we want to create tomorrow so that women's mate preferences can play out in a way that facilitates reproduction? So individual, and it's that hatred that women get from certain aspects, and sometimes as the manosphere on online forums for incels. It's a really disgusting and vile hatred that they should stop with. Men shouldn't blame women for this because women are just acting out their nature. And women shouldn't blame men. I mean, as individuals, of course, we have responsibilities and we can encourage individuals to change. But at a group societal level, it doesn't work like that. We are depressingly predictive. So yeah, if you have a daughter or a son or a man or woman that you know is struggling with this, yeah, tell them to get better. Tell them to try harder and compete harder. But on a societal level, harder competition has the adverse effect. The stronger competition there is between men, the more losers there will be. It's not going to even the playing field if men try harder. You're just going to get stronger stratification the same way you get in economic systems. And in so many human activities where you have this Pareto distribution that only hardens with competition. So we need a way to roll back the battle of the sexes and try to find a way together to create a mating regime that allows us to exist also in the future so that there can be free women also in the centuries ahead.
That is so interesting. Yes, I think that what you said, like really the thing that is going to kill us is this resentment we have going on, this mutual resentment. Men blaming women, women blaming men, right? The women are blaming the men by saying men aren't good enough. The men are blaming the women by saying they're all feminist witches. We don't want, and that's what we have to get rid of, and instead find the value of one another and see each other in sort of the way that we've all been victimized by this new society, with this new dating pool that we've set up. It's just not serving anybody well. And I think the best that anybody can do in their own individual situation is have hope and keep trying. Like for women, don't give up hope on finding a mate, right? Don't just write all men off as not good enough. And for men, don't give up on all women and say they're all too demanding. They're all too, do the best you can. That's what we can do for everybody, is just keep trying, keep hoping. That's, I guess, part of our religion is, faith, hope, and charity. Those do seem to be necessary components of the solution, not in a religious way. It just struck me that, maybe that's part of the answer. But we didn't get to talk much about, I did want to talk about kind of the development of the history of human mating strategies. And I know people can read about that in your book, right? They can read about sort of this heroic time period that you talk about and how that has developed. So is that where we can go get that? Because I think that I was just fascinated by hearing you talk about this 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. I would love to learn more about that. So
I cover the first 6 million years, covering not too many pages, and then the rest of the book is the last 800 years to what happened after we dissolved your polygynous kinship societies and how that set in motion processes of female empowerment and increasing individualism that led us to where we are today, which is the reason why we have cell phones and computers and can talk to each other across the world. That was a product of the transition from polygamy to lifelong monogamy. It would not have happened without it.
Okay. Well, my gosh, Mads, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm just so intrigued. So I guess people can keep track of your work by reading your book. What else do you put out? Where do you put out your articles? How can people keep an eye on what you're doing if they want to? Yeah,
just go to Google Scholar and search my name, and you will get to the page where my articles are, and you will get free access to many of them.
Okay.
And thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for the invitation. I greatly enjoyed this conversation. It was fun and very interesting, and you gave me some new thoughts, so I really appreciate that.
Well, good. Thank you so much. And I will talk to you another time, I hope. I want to sincerely thank Mads Larsen for the incredibly important work that he is doing and for his courage in continuing to sound this warning bell despite people not wanting to hear it because it goes against their cultural biases. That's something I really relate to. I hope that his work will get more focus because these are important things for us to pay attention to. Another huge shout out to Mads for being willing to get on and talk to me, a Mormon from Utah, while he is at the University of Oslo. I thought this was a very valuable conversation. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. I'll see you next time.